Hi, I'm Emji Spero. I'm going to be, as they say, channeling the work of Susan Sontag tonight. Specifically, Susan Sontag's journals. In thinking about lineages of influence, I keep returning to Rebecca Solnit's essay, Grandmother Spider, in which she interrogates patrilineage and mourns the obliteration of mothers and grandmothers from familial timelines. Ever more lives disappear, she writes, as if unloved, until you have narrowed a forest down to a tree, a web down to a line. Drawing a thicket between familial femme obliteration and aesthetic lineages, Solnit continues. This is what it takes to construct a linear narrative of blood or influence or meaning. She writes, everyone is influenced by those things that precede formal education, that come out of the blue and out of everyday life. Those excluded influences I call the grandmothers. If I am to speak to you in the language of patriarchy, I would say that I am under the influence of Susan Sontag, an American writer and feminist best known for her queerness, her cancer, and best known for her essays, including Notes on Camp, Against Interpretation, and Illness as Metaphor. But I would prefer to speak of my grandmothers. Easily forgettable everyday interactions, a conversation had on the way to BART, the cumulative gestures of living under capital, lists of books, fragments, receipts, morning habits and routines, the sounds of the highway through my skylight, texts, masturbation, meeting notes, the objects on my desk. And if I am to speak in this way that refuses, I would say that I am not only under the influence of my grandmothers, but that I am under the influence of Susan Sontag's grandmothers. The things that happen before and after the essay. The things that happen when the page is blank. When life is being lived. When one is tired. And here perhaps is where this project began, in exhaustion. We were both very tired. We had just finished de-installing an art show and we were packing boxes into the back of her car when Jess Marks Gale handed me someone else's journal. Here, she said, this made me think of you. The book that she handed me was a collection of Susan Sontag's journals and notebooks, 1947 to 1963. In these journals, Sontag vacillates between voices, switching rapidly from a confessional I voice to notes about what books to read, notes for essays. And then there is a voice that she slips into for days at a time, a voice which lists what happened during the day in rapid succession with little insight or commentary.
Jimmy called me, the father called me.
The day presented as dry, inventoried. This stark voice in which the I mostly falls away, and when it is present, it is in a way that implies absence, that resists confession. What I have come to think about or call the writing of exhaustion. So this section I will be reading to you from Susan Sontag's journals inhabits this modality, the writing of exhaustion. Here is some context. She is enmeshed in an extended depression in New York and is living with her son, David, and her current partner, Irene. Things have not been good between them, Susan and Irene. And it is the depression and the writing of exhaustion that I wish to speak with you about after the reading, if you want. This relation between the I and confession, between confession and exhaustion, between exhaustion and the condition sometimes called left melancholy, what comes from struggling alone or together and sometimes feels endless. Or, as Tessa Michaela just said to us here today, I feel shame every time I write the letter I. And yet, I. Undated, but certainly February 1960. This is Sontag. During this period, Susan Sontag noted down her day in detail. What follows are a few representative entries. Saturday, awake at 7. Museum at 10:30. I, which is what she refers to Irene as, I. I arrives at 1, coffee plus lunch, the film Trouble in Paradise. 4:30 to 5, coffee with I. Talk. She comes with me in a cab to 118th Street to pick up David. Drop I at 79th Street. She is going to see Alfred Chester. I feed D and put him to bed. A calls to urge me to come to the party. I read The Listener. Call Jack. Leave at 9:30. Cab to 14th Street. I buy tickets for Kenneth Anger film and Pirandello party. I leave Times Square. Bardot movie, home at 4 a.m. Sunday, awake at 7, rage. Call A at 9. Jack picks us up at 9:15. Breakfast at Rumpelmeyer's. Walk in Central Park. Hotel Pierre with Jack and Anne and 2 friends, Jack and H. Cab to Alfred's. Lunch with I plus A at Bocce Place. Matinee off, I go to the Commons. Our talk. We return to Alfred at 6:45. I calls Anne. We all go down, I, A, and David, and I, to Frank's Pizza. We pick I up at 8 on Hudson Street. Go to films at Carnegie Hall Playhouse, 10:30, cab home, put D to bed. I wants to eat. Sex, no talk, sleep. Sunday, a week later. Depression, lassitude. I take Benzedrine at 5. Cab to Wash Square at 6 to meet A. Dinner at Frank's. Coffee after at Reggio's. Wednesday, I am tired. CCNY, the classes are good. I call I at 11. I tell her I am coming home at noon. Cab home. I get in bed, we make love, I don't come. She tells me she wonders why she hasn't been unfaithful. She comes back to CCNY at 3:15, I'm late. We return by cab, eat at Cuban restaurant. Associated supermarket. D is waiting. I go to Pearl Cousins, she isn't there. Pearl comes and I goes to a movie at Israeli Coffee House. We met at 12:30. Sex, I don't come. Tuesday, fatigue. David out. I is up, I weep. She says she has a dinner date with Anne Morissette, writer and playwright. She is blank, un-exy. She starts to run water for a bath. I'm bursting, I whimper to myself. Weep, leave, walk to Helen Lynn's car on 72nd Street crying. Drive to Sarah Lawrence. More lecture on truth. I call I at the studio at 12. Appointment with student Michael Kellenberg at 12:45. Taylor lecture at 1. I borrowed $10 from Peter Reed. 2 conferences, 2 to 4 on SART, Bad Faith, X. Cab train, cab home. And so after reading these journals, I started writing journals for the first time since I was 15, which I stopped doing because there was this moment when I was in the psychiatric ward in Virginia, and I was like listening at the door, and through the door I could hear my mother talking to the doctor, saying that she had been reading my journals and telling the doctor everything she had read from in my journals, and that was when I stopped doing that. And so I started doing that again recently in April, after reading Susan Sontag's journals. So I will read some of those to you tonight, right now. $6.29. 6:29. Submitted the way that it goes that failed, thank you, to Ugly Duckling Press's open chapbook, period. Met Justin again at Farley's to work on our essays, his on, the notice, mine on, already. How Ivy spent a year not writing, a year saying to everyone, I'm working on this or that project, describing it in detail, maintaining in this way her identity as writer in a period when writing is not happening. Reiteration through the utterance, I am working on, while being in the meantime. Thus being writer in the absence of the writing. Thus being writer while fucking and getting groceries and Skyping her boyfriend and while serving people drinks. What is the writing of exhaustion? Or what is writing in the aftermath? Ashley White has arrived. A scrambling of transparent papers in the ambiguous lap of the artist. What shows through? What is hidden? Her hands up and down my spine turn my shirt transparent as the papers. Seven, 3. Left this journal in Dee's motel. Returned from the summit with Kate and Nora, slid the card into the lock, and Kate said, we're just barging in, as I swung the door wide. Dee in the armchair. Put your hand on my forehead, Dee said, and I passed my fingers across gathering liquid. Then leaned down and ran my tongue along Dee's forehead, lapping Dee's soul. Kate sitting on the bed, repeatedly dropping her legs out, then pulling them together as she spoke. Dee couldn't leave the motel. Spasms. We archived burritos into our bodies. Nora and I stood close outside. Back at the speak, Ashley stroked my face with white and light blue makeup, pulling back at the corners of my eyes. We cut the cocaine with baking soda from the kitchen. I pulled my pants down and my legs over my head, and Ashley mixed the heroin with water and pressed the tip of the syringe into my asshole, and then into hers. 15 cc's. Lana sat on the bed watching with tweezers. She plucked one hair from my stomach, and I plucked one from the center of a mole on her arm. 7, 6. Jack Frost recommends On Resignation by Adorno. I can't stand by the end, Jack says. I can stand by the beginning. 7, 7. Passed out at the trans clinic today while injecting. Waking, slumped against the steady arm of Joe, the lab attendant. You passed out, Joe said. I forgot to eat, I said. Why, Joe asked, and pressed on. You pulled the syringe out of your leg, and you said, I think I'm going to pass. And then you were out. 7, 8. Conversations circling the efficacy of poetry as political action. Conversations circling cyborg proclivities and corporate empiricism, co-surveillance of Google glass holes. Conversations circling West melancholy or left nihilism and the writing of exhaustion. Conversations that turn into tattoos. Conversations that begin or end in being bound with ropes. Conversations circling practices of writing together. Conversations about when to meet and where. Conversations interrupted by your sext. Conversations circling gestural utterance and the repetitive motions we call labor. Conversations circling failure. Conversations in cafes and the essays or Facebook likes that follow. "7:16, 1 a.m. RCA is burning. The squat caught fire. Above the flames, the billboard that reads, 'Motion to barbecue.' Stood there with Helena and Judy, and we held hands and watched it a while. Email CA, coffee tomorrow with Jack Frost."